we're actually still in the Geopolitics, but the Donetsk region, which we're almost to. And I keep telling people it's not flat. And in fact, what you're seeing here, there's a ledge all along here. And when Russia took Izum the first time, they rolled the tanks in, they lined up here on the edge of this hill, and everything's covered in snow, but the whole city of Izum is laid out there in front of you. You just can't see it. It's all houses and buildings just covered in snow. And they just demolished the entire city from up here, completely protected, completely safe, and leveled it. That's how they took it so easily the first time. So a huge terrain advantage. High ground always wins most of the time.
Here we were, on a ridge overlooking the Ukrainian city of Izum in the Kharkiv Oblast. The four of us, myself an atheist philosopher and YouTuber, Greg an American pastor and 26-year veteran of charity work in Ukraine, Zhenya his Ukrainian charity partner, and Pierre, a British volunteer aid worker usually stationed to the south of where we were now, were continuing our journey in a battle bus driving the length of the front lines. February 2024 was typically Ukraine cold, the snow crunching gratifyingly underfoot. In my case, with primary progressive multiple sclerosis, those feet weren't typically very good. Indeed, it was here that I had my biggest fall, toppling like a sack of spuds. Luckily, Pierre with his camera managed to miss filming that one and saving my embarrassment. In this neck of the woods, you're never far from seeing the scars of war, even if many traces have been hidden under a bandage of pristine snow. Bandages often failed to disguise the disfigurement of broken bones. Here, they would be windowless buildings, crumbled facades, rubbleized walls. We had travelled down from Kharkiv late that morning. We'd stopped at an amusing sign, evidence of the obvious Ukrainian distaste for their oppressive neighbours. The sign should have read Belgorod, a city not too far to the north. Yep, it's now here named Dick City.
Means something with
Keep pulling up. Go all the way to it.
like Dick City, something like that.
Right.
Dick City.
Yeah, sorry.
Evidence, in case you needed any, that a grown man can snigger like a teenage boy. Izum was a town that had suffered greatly, having been occupied by the Russians after their initial invasion and then liberated by the Ukrainians during their lightning Kharkiv counter-offensive. Though that all seemed like an age ago in a war that felt even then like it had lasted much longer than it really had, military still crawled around these towns, so close as they were to the front lines. We stopped off at the site of a Russian war crime. Sadly, such places were never far away. Greg recounted the experiences of a woman who had lived on the 4th floor of an apartment building. The building had been targeted by the Russian tank crews purposefully, relentlessly hammering it with their shells until it fell apart, killing 52 civilians cowering in the basements.
So guys, let me tell you about this story that never made the news. There's never been a news reporter here. There's never been anything here. If you look there, Johnny, you see on that wall above that door over there a candle.
Above the door of the building, painted as a memorial, was a candle, below which were written the words, "We will remember." This had been a single building across where 55 people had lived. The open space should have been a continuation of the building that had been destroyed, and underneath that rubble was the fated basement. A graveyard for the innocent.
Living in this building. This was not, of course, not military, zero. It was not any secret laboratory. They had hung flags out on their building saying civilians only, children only. In fact, if you swing around here, you can see the children's old playground. And they had all their flags out, and 55 people were in this basement. And I'll wait for you to swing back around. 55 people were in this basement. The Russian tanks rolled in right behind the building. The flags are out. The people are in there huddling and scared.
Only 3 civilians of the 55 survived as the building collapsed on them, cowering as they were in the basement from the Russian shells.
How do I know this story? Because I was here right after it happened, after Izum was liberated. And the lady that lived on the 4th floor there, so it'd be the floor below the sofa, came running out to me and says, "What are you doing here?" And I said, and we were speaking Russian, and I said, I'm here to help tell the world what's really happening. And she actually stood about where we're standing and told me the entire story of what happened here. So that's how I know.
This was a privilege Greg had of speaking to actual victims of these Russian war crimes, of getting first-hand evidence.
But the numbers of civilians that have been killed is way beyond any imagination. And when you keep hearing the words genocide, and then media that is off base will say, "Oh, well, it's not the true definition of genocide." They're full of it, guys. They're killing people indiscriminately. If you come a little bit further, Johnny, I want to show you something that at that point I'll stop talking, because when you come to this point, there's no more talking, and you'll understand why at this moment we're not there. So you can see, of course, the building burns, and you can see here the artwork. We come around this tree with the hands and the souls going to heaven. Okay, all the people killed here in an instant. There are 5 pictures, but scattered around this building. Over there, there's a lot more pictures that are under the snow. All 52 people's photos are here, and this is a special place that nobody knows about unless I'm here or you're here.
It's about reminding people that this has happened. Our memories are, unfortunately, not great. We forget things quickly, and things have happened in this war that we forget, or we're not aware of. It's a terrible thing, and we can't let it continue.
Let me ask you one question as I'll help you off this step here. What's your emotion when you see a building like this and the story I tell you?
There's obvious sadness in this. but then, you know, the different stages of grief turn to anger and then frustration that, you know, the world looks on and 2 years later this is still continuing, and by rights it shouldn't still be continuing. And then, you know, that's when I get angry. We all have to do something about this. Thank you for bringing me here, Greg. Appreciate that.
It can be difficult to get the full sense of a place, the gravitas of an event, from the comforts of our own homes, looking from afar through the lenses of media organisations on various screens. Seeing wanton destruction firsthand is valuable, to imagine being the victim, and to try to imagine what it must take to be the perpetrator. And this single incident has been played out countless times, in countless cities, villages and towns, in countless regions along the length and breadth of the front lines. But not just the front lines. Of course, horrific death and destruction can be inflicted upon cities from afar, from Kharkiv to Lviv, from Odessa to Kyiv. Death knows no bounds. And the walls of those once safe buildings not unlike where you are watching this from, offer scant protection from those weapons of war. We continued our journey toward Kramatorsk, where we were to stay that night, but we first stopped off for lunch in Izyum. We descended into a buffet restaurant below grounds on Pierre's recommendation for some Ukrainian culinary delights. Indeed, I had accepted that there would be times my veganism would take a back seat. This was one of them. Here is a short insight into my world. I'm pretty used to stumbling around, wobbling from side to side, but I get from A to B. Put a tray in my hand with a bowl of borscht that I don't want to spill, and I dolly step like someone who is thinking far too hard about putting one foot badly in front of another. Though we couldn't film it, what was interesting about this stop was seeing Greg and Zhenya in action. Networking was what they excelled at. Here, they paid for the lunches of some soldiers queuing just behind us as a thanks for their service. This was the opportunity to spark conversation with the unit, and by the end of that conversation, a relationship had been formed, contact details swapped, and mutual appreciation shared. The main man they spoke to was a soldier who had fought in Avdiivka, Soledar and Bakhmut, among other places, but whose injuries had forced him to join an air defence unit tasked with shooting down Shahed attack drones. His present unit was in a good enough situation, and the soldiers implored that any of Greg and Zhenya's aid should go to those more in need. Greg ensured that the troops knew that if they were ever in need, they had a number to call. The networking on show here was something we saw a number of times, breaking down initial barriers and showing camaraderie, with the sole intention of Greg and Zhenya helping units in need.
So, I'm going to do the hand-to-hand, and this is representative of everything. So here you go. This is ruku varuku, hand-to-hand, and you guys see it. This is my friend here. His English is actually very good, so I said, man...
Come on.
Oh, come on, it's great. And we were talking earlier, if you remember, about the need for medical supplies. Mm-hmm. But we began to talk about these antennas.
We returned to ground level Izyum, a place that was crawling with military, to continue our journey to Kramatorsk. On the way, however, we stopped off at a bar restaurant seemingly in the middle of nowhere to meet up with someone that Greg had interacted with online through his YouTube channel, the British South African former policeman turned combat medic Peter Fouché, or Pete the Medic. The two struck it off like a house on fire, both very religious and with much common ground. This moment became the genesis of a crowdfunding campaign to supply combat medics with more appropriate vehicles for their dangerous work.
In there and everywhere, and it's a shooting range vehicle at the moment because that's all we're doing every day. But this is essentially what Project Constantine is. We're medics, and we help the armed forces of Ukraine with their.
I will explain more.
With their.
Pete founded a charitable organisation called Project Constantine, a dedicated team of independent volunteers who provide essential supplies to soldiers on the front line. When we met Pete that night in a restaurant, he gave us each a former grenade canister emblazoned with the insignia of Project Constantine, a shot glass of sorts, and certainly for me, a small reminder that I keep close to me on my desk of the incredible work he and so many others have done and continue to do. After my return, we set about fundraising and raised hundreds of thousands of dollars to purchase, refurbish, export and deliver 4 armoured medical evacuation vehicles to different units on the front line. Each of these was equipped with all sorts of goodies such as the best drone protection we could get and other added benefits.
You can see what I'm with the guys now with all the vehicles.
Look how shiny
and some of the projects we're doing is taking longer than I expected. So you can see your labor's here, man. 4 of these bad boys.
Let me tell you one of the coolest things. The coolest things is the engines are amazing, and I love driving them.
Really?
And oh my, I'm having such a blast. I do a lot of right-hand
They
driving.
are
when
good
I'm in
old.
Africa.
They're good old Land Rover Defenders, right? Which is
Man,
like
and
used
when
to
you
be
go
the
down the-
workhorse of
When
farms.
you go down the road, the people are just looking and so happy, and you know they'll wave and all of this and waving back, and you go past the block post and they just salute you. They're not stopping you. It's just awesome. The engines are amazing. When that turbo kicks in, it just makes you want to sing. It's
Really?
just that whistle. Oh yeah, they're awesome. But I will tell you one of the coolest things on that video. You saw these lights that are mounted on the top. Okay?
Right.
They are searchlights for search and rescue. So yeah, right there, just the little light right there. It's actually a big light. So how that works is that is a remote control searchlight that's like a long throw beam. And when you pull up to a location, if for some reason you needed some light really quickly, the driver or the passenger has the controls of that light. You can flip it on, you can dim it, or you can make it, full strength, whatever you want. And then there's a joystick where you move it and rotate it around left and right and move it up and down. So let's say, you're at a safe place doing an evacuation, but the guys just need some extra light. Of course, the driver never leaves his seat, so he's ready to go. And he just controls that light, shoots it down where the guys are trying to do some work, and everything is just, it's good, man. It's good.
Brilliant. Pete the Medic was due to receive one of these to protect him while he tirelessly went about saving the lives of Ukrainian heroes. Sadly, before those vehicles could be delivered, on the 27th of June 2024, Pete died fulfilling his role, something to which he was unwaveringly committed, on the front line near Liman. Pete, like so many others in this terrible war, gave his life so that others may live and thrive in the freedom to which they aspire, which they deserve. It was a dark day in the online community that had forged a connection with Pete, and for those with whom he worked. A stark reminder, if ever we should forget, of the dangers and horrors of war. Sometimes life is just horrendously unfair. It's all the more appalling when one country is trying to make it even more so. I don't believe in the concept of hell. It seems to me to be a battlefield somewhere in eastern Ukraine. But if I did, I'd be hard pressed not to send Putin there to warm his feet. Back in February, later that night, we arrived at the Base UA Charity HQ in Kramatorsk. This was the organisation that Pierre has worked for, helping, amongst other things, to evacuate civilians from war-torn areas. I slept that night in the house that they had converted to the accommodation for their charity workers, and from where, at that time, they were organising their activities. I seriously regret not recording the countless conversations I had that night with the various volunteers from around the world who had coalesced in Kramatorsk to work on behalf of others. The stories and motivations were inspirational and fascinating. This charity is one of many in Ukraine doing this vital work. Here, they were renting accommodation as centrally as they could to the areas in which they were working. Kramatorsk was not and is not entirely safe, having been the site of many a missile and drone attack. The HQ was home to the volunteers who led transient lives, constantly coming and going on different missions to evacuate civilians, or working with affected children, giving them a chance to artistically articulate and express themselves in one of the local centres that Base UA had set up. Now, clearly one of the most important aspects of this evening was that the base camp had oat milk. Yes, I could have a decent cup of tea.
So, what are your thoughts about going to Seversk?
Well, I'm very happy to go back to start with. I've been there for ages. I think it's good for you to see it. I don't know, occasionally it gets hit. It's always slightly nervy, it's sort of surrounded on three fronts. Yeah, at least there's a basement in the hospital if something happens. But we should all wear decent, PPE, body armour and, be protected. Yeah, it's always an interesting drive there. It's quite beautiful actually, the scenery. It's very hilly and but the hospital's quite a depressing place when I've been before. It's like, it's the only place that has a Starlink and
So there's no
find a great around there.
there's no internet access there.
There's no phone signal, nothing. There's no running water, there's no electricity. They
Yeah.
obviously have a generator there.
And yet people still live there.
Yeah. It's quite rural, a lot of the town. There's houses with gardens, lots of animals, and it's mainly just old people left. And I understand why they stay now.
This was our plan to go to Seversk the very next day. An off-the-cuff plan to help with one of the Base UA missions. It was a town very much surrounded on three sides. Wow,
What do you want?
it's a lot of helmets.
Greg's got body armour, right?
I believe so for me.
Yeah.
all the equipment you need to evacuate people from. I was just amazed at just the range of things that you need to conduct the activities you guys do.
Try it on for size.
Okay.
Nothing's particularly easy with multiple sclerosis when you can't feel your fingers.
See, one thing you need to learn is how to get it on quickly.
Yeah, I haven't even...
No, everyone struggles at the start.
I mean,
oh my God, apart from JP. Straight in there. How does that fit?
I guess if I tighten it, fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. Once I know how to tighten it, I can't see what I'm doing. Here is Pierre. That is a picture of him to prove that we are indeed together. He's been awesome in accompanying me. We were today looking at some ruins just outside one of the places we've been in, and here are some of the...
Of course, the night wouldn't be complete without me doing a video to let people know exactly what I had been up to. And so, here I was, grabbing a space anywhere I could, and the slightest bit of internet connection I could cobble together. So we leave this episode hoping to go to Seversk, slightly to the northeast, before returning to our loop of the front lines and moving in a southerly direction. Some months later, I found myself saddened by the news of Pete's death. And I think it's probably apt that this episode ends with my somewhat bumbling commemoration of Pete's life.
It's incredibly courageous, and he has made the ultimate sacrifice. So when we were driving along near the front lines, Greg and Zhenya and myself and Pierre popped into a restaurant and met Pete for the first time. It's pre-arranged, but it was quite something to see. So Pete and Zhenya are religious people. They've been working Zhenya all his life in Ukraine. He's a Ukrainian, but Greg has been going to Ukraine for 26 years now, and with their religious backgrounds, obviously there was this commonality with Pete, who's an incredibly spiritual religious person. As you guys know, I'm an atheist philosopher, so my worldview is entirely different to those. But my goodness, to see those particularly, when Pete and Greg were just sitting in that restaurant, almost heads together, just having this moment together where they first met, but they'd met online previously, and they were having this very spiritual moment. It was very powerful, obviously, to see. Now, although I may not share the worldview of Greg and Zhenya and Pete, I recognise that the power of their convictions is part of what drives them to do what they do. And of course, it's not the same for everyone. There are plenty of religious people around the world who would feel completely different about Ukraine, right? And there's plenty of non-religious people or different religions, people of different religions who feel strongly for Ukraine and not. And the world is just a mix of all sorts, right? But when we can find commonality, so find that which binds us rather than that which drives us apart, it can be very strong. So despite our differing worldviews, we are all bound together, and you and I and Greg and Zhenya and Rick the Ukrainian and Pete the medic, we're all bound together with our desire to see good prevail, and liberty prevail, and democracy prevail. It is why we're here, and why we care. And Pete paid the ultimate sacrifice for that care, for that desire to see right prevail. Now, though, for those people who believe in an ultimate creator and an afterlife and a soul or some kind of existence after death, they will have their sense of what will take place. But for me, our lives, we get one shot at this, and that makes it even more
powerful for me to see someone go and sacrifice their life for these ideals. So for me, though there is no afterlife, life after death exists in the memories that we have of those people. I can think of those times I've sat on Twitter and seen videos of Pete remonstrating. Like, for a religious man, that man could swear, and he could swear on point. He was a good swearer. And I'd see them go viral on Twitter and go, "That's Pete the medic. I've broken bread with him, so to speak." But he was very forthright in his opinions. What you saw was what you got with Pete, and it was wonderful. And he was raw, and he experienced that war, and he shared that war with us. So he will live on in our memories of him. And also his legacy will be insanely important. Goodness knows the number of people that he has saved, lives he has saved, people who would not exist if it were not for him. Pete's legacy will be in those people who are alive because of Pete the medic, and their children, and their children's children. That is the part that Pete has played in this here world. And his communication on the live streams and across the socials and to friends and family, and constantly advocating for that which is good and that which is right, for Ukraine to prevail. He was very clear on that. So clear that it drove him to leave his country and come to Ukraine to assist those fighting in the toughest of environments in the world. And hats off to him. He was a wonderful guy. He was a raw guy, and it was a pleasure to have met him, to have known him. And if it weren't for people like him, Ukraine would be in an even more challenging situation. As I say, it's one thing to give your life protecting your own country. It's another thing to be a foreigner and see that as a moral obligation, and to go to that country to aid them at the expense of your life. That's an incredible sacrifice. And that speaks to his moral fibre, a very clear moral fibre. And, you know, we share with Pete our sense of unfairness at how this war has unfolded. This sense of unfairness when we see residential buildings ripped apart by the heinous activities, the missiles that carry death and destruction with them across the border from Russia to Ukraine. Every day is full of sorrow and pain, and today is no different. And it just so happens that this war has come home to roost, and to let us know very personally, or certainly for myself, that war brings sorrow and war brings death, and the sooner this war comes to an end with the right outcome, the better. And that is why we are all here, putting pressure on those who might deign to listen to what we say, putting pressure on them to act to bring this war to the correct conclusion as soon as possible. We need to keep the work up in spreading these messages and in supporting those who themselves are fighting effectively for us. Pete was one of those who fought for us. He was there on the battlefield. He was there saving lives. A tremendously courageous man. So Pete gave me, while I was in that restaurant, he gave me a a Project Constantine, which is an organisation. I was just cleaning out, spilt some of that on me. He gave me this empty grenade canister. I thought I'd better clean it out because goodness knows what explosives are still inside it. I didn't want to imbibe them. My friend came around recently and accidentally left some land Navy rum, so I thought that would be the right drink to share. I don't have many spirits in the house, and I thought I'd have a drink to Pete, just to say what a wonderful human being he was to have made the decisions he did, and to have paid the ultimate price. So here's to Pete, the medic. I got through this one. Slava Ukraini, my friend. Slava Ukraini.